You know it's a hot day when you can hear the green heads bouncing off your helmet. And if you don't know what green heads are, that means you haven't been out in the country in New York State. But they are biting hard. So today I'm going to run the Holzfforma g395 in a real job. I'm going to buck up all this wood with it. And we'll just see, I have it tuned where it's running pretty sharp, and I like the way it runs. That thing is a strong saw. So we're going to fuel it up, get it started, and I'm not going to say who, but I have a friend who kind of is learning the business. I would say that's the way I would characterize it. And one of the lessons I've learned over the years is when you actually go out to cut for a reel, like if you're on somebody else's property or you're doing a job, you take the most stable system that you can. And what I mean by that is the saws that you know are working and reliable, along with the same fuel, the same oil, same bar oil, a couple of spare chains, and whatever tools you need to do to maintain it. So you have brought with you a system that has been proven on your own, like if you have a farm or you do get-togethers or whatever it is. Make sure when you go for real that you've got a system that works. It's not a time to play with toys. It's not a time to play with hobby saws. Since I am a enthusiast in a hobby, what I always do, and if you look back in all my videos, I've always said it, is I'll have the saws that are fun for me, that I want to run, or in this case here, I want to develop, and I'll have a stable system with me, or a saw on the tractor, or whatever I want to call it during that period of time. But the concept is I always have a system to where I know I can get through the job. So for example, if I'm testing oil, I'll do it here. But if I'm going to Kentucky to cut wood down there, for example, I'm bringing my 565 or one of my 372s as my stable saw, and then maybe another saw for fun. But I'm going to use my Husqvarna gas oil mix, where I use the Husqvarna synthetic blend, 32-to-1 with a decent gasoline. No funny stuff. No, I'm not going to say the brands, but if I haven't had a lot of time on it and I'm not sure of how the saws are going to run on it, you don't go off to a customer and figure it out. That's when you do it on your home ground, not on a real job. And it's a tough lesson, because a lot of times you listen online and you got these guys saying you got to do this, you got to do that, and the mentality is when you're going off to do a job, to do the best you possibly can. And if you haven't been around long enough, it's easy to say, okay, what these guys are saying might be better than what I have. Let me go spend the money on this goofy oil or this goofy fuel or chain or something like that, because it's got to be better than what I have, right? And that's a trap. It's a marketing trap to buy into it, but it's also you increase your chances of failure by adding a discontinuity into the system by trying something new that you haven't had time on with your saws and your environment, how you operate your saws. I really don't know how else to say it. Prove it on your own home ground before you bring it out to a customer site or to a place where it's important. That's the message. And that's everything from chain, bar, chainsaw, gas oil mix, bar oil, sharpening tools, all the system that's required to do the job. Take a proven one with you, and then add a fun saw if you want. And then if it blows up, who cares? But you're not dependent on a wholesale change because you either bought into a fancy oil or you bought into a fancy bar and chain or whatever it is, or a kit saw, whatever you're doing. You don't want to do the research and development on somebody else's place. You want to do it on your own ground. And that's my point. So, case in point, I'm bringing a stable system. This John Sered here, the 2175, I've run this for, my God, a couple of years. I know it's stable. I've also ran it a little bit this last couple of weeks, and it's still stable, the oil, the gas, all that stuff is a stable system. So I know if I have a trouble with my fun saw, which is a Holzfforma, I've got a stable backup. That's the concept. So having said all that, yet again on research and development is I take the approach of making one change at a time versus wholesale changes. So even in the research and development, for example, when I'm trying this saw, the saw is the discontinuity. The gas oil mix, bar oil, and all that's the same stuff I've used before. So I'm really only changing one thing. And that's the only way to really collect data if you're trying to do it scientifically. So for example, if this saw fails, I have a stable saw, but I know it's not the gas oil mix because I've already built a track record with it with my other stable saws. I know it's the saw. The antithesis of that is you change up everything. You go out and get a can of Husqvarna premix at 50-1, or you go get some race gas and you put in some fancy oil. You put your hobby saws in your truck and you go running out to do a job, and then things start popping. And you don't know if it was the saw or the oil or the gas or what, because you have so many different changes in the system, you really can't quantify which is the one that was different. So that's advice to the guys who want to follow in that path of developing saws. And on that note, we're going to change one part of the saw system that has been working for me all year and put this blue saw into the mix, and let's just see how it works. Now another point is a subset of that is when you're out listening to guys and all the experts building saws and doing kits and all this stuff telling you how to do it, right alongside of that, I would suggest you weight their opinions based on how much they actually use their stuff in the type of work that you're doing. Now what I mean by that is, you know, I'm a farmer, I'm a hobbyist, so you know, I do the logging sometimes. I've done it for decades, and I do firewood, I've done that for decades, but I'm not a professional, which is why I use a couple of the loggers to test my builds before I talk about them too much online. And that's practice what you preach type of a mentality, is I want to see how they work in somebody else's world before I go and blast it online and say this is like the best way or the best saw or something like that. And yeah, what happens is, yeah, some of the stuff that I do and some of the things I recommend are boring because they're not exciting based on the current fad. But what I can say is they actually have proven themselves in the test of actual work before they actually end up on my channel. And if it's not, I'm going to tell you, like this has not. We're going to show you real time. And when I do like the series on a saw, I'm documenting it. I'm not saying that's a steady saw that's ready to go to work. If you notice, I'll say that's a potentially good saw that has a lot of potential. If next year we're out here running that saw, now it's a proven saw. Well, the same thing goes with any of the fads that you see online for either building a hot saw or building a so-called work saw, kit saw, stuff like that, is if the guy who's selling the concept or selling the knowledge is out there working it or has people in his world that are working it that he's willing to show online, in my mind, that increases the credibility of his concepts, his ideas, his skill set. If all you see is a 4 or 5 cookie cut race, that does nothing for me. You know, I've seen some real fast saws blow everybody away at a get together, and then next week end up with a scored up piston because it was running too lean or just the build concept wasn't working. So there's a lot of crap out there. And I'm not saying I'm any expert, but I'm going to be up front with what I can and cannot do, and what I can and cannot predict, and what I can and cannot say quantitatively. And I like this saw, and I've done it with most of my videos. I'll tell you I like it, but I don't know whether or not that's a legitimate saw until I put time on it. Usually it takes me 6 months to a year. It's like I know this is a legitimate concept. I've got 2 years on this saw, you know, on and off, but when I first put it together, I put a solid fall into winter on it. And it's been doing jobs on and off for the last couple of years. It's never let me down. So I know this build concept is a solid concept that I can talk about online. And I've got both my experience, plus I built a couple of these for a pro logger. I got those out there as well to back up my feeling that when I say this build concept of 2175 is a solid one, I've got data, quantitative data, and well, actually you call it empirical data to back up my claim. So, something to think about, and I don't consider myself anything special. It's just, okay, I'm boring, but my whole thing is I want to make sure that you either see me struggle with the development process so you can kind of get an idea what you might go through, but also get real data that you can see real time as I'm seeing it. That's the purpose of the channel. And make your own decisions or learn to improve on what I've done. I have no pride. On that note, let's see whether or not this saw concept is legitimate for at least one job. And I would say by the fall, we're going to know whether or not this saw can actually be considered a work saw. I'm going to speculate and say maybe. The 288 has proven itself some. I had some failures, but I've got probably 4 to 5 months on that saw, fairly steady, heavy use. So I'm beginning to believe it's a legitimate work saw for like a farmer type or a firewood type or a homeowner. I'm not yet willing to say it's a legitimate saw for a logger. So we're starting that process with this saw. The first thing a saw has to do in order to make a positive impression on me is start without me killing myself. 4 pulls is a good number. 6 pulls is a bad number. That saw is really quick, there's no doubt about it. And yeah, it seems to have a little more piston rattle, but I'm really not sure that's a bad thing. It's just a thing. This is kind of what I was talking about before, where I'm really doing research and development on that saw right now. And so I have to spend time with a screwdriver because it's not an auto tune. But it's changing. The saw itself is changing as it gets hot. So I'm having to chase it with a screwdriver. And I'll eventually get it to where it's stable enough, and that's what we'll run for the rest of the day. But my point to you is I'm doing that research and development on my place. When I get that thing right, I'll go to somewhere else, assuming that it's a reliable saw, and I certainly won't have to chase it with a screwdriver, because if you're on the clock or you're in front of customers, the last thing you want to do is be somebody they hired and spend your time doing maintenance and tweaks and tunes on your tools. That's the definition of a loser, you know, in terms of a professional. The stuff gets on the job, it's got to work, and it's got to keep working, can't stop. And as a person doing work, when I'm doing it even on my own farm, I don't mind doing R&D on a saw like this, but when it really counts, I want to get the stuff done. I don't want to be fooling around with a screwdriver. I just want to go out and cut, get it done. And I came into this day expecting to do this, so it's not a disappointment. But had I put time into that saw and then came out, you know, on a time critical type job, and had to mess around with it like that or have it blow up, that would be a loss. And that's what I was saying before, is always make sure when you get on a real job that you have a developed and reliable and predictable system, and at least one as a backup if you happen to bring along some fun saws or hobby saws, you know what I'm saying? All right, a couple little points while we work on this stuff. These logs over here were my higher quality logs. I did stick a basswood in there, and there's a couple of really nice ones up there. The stuff to the right here was junk, and I just wanted to see if they could buy it. If they buy it, well, fine. If it's not, it's firewood. But this is ash. So with ash, you know, it's about diameter, straightness, and then the color, right? This stuff here is such a small diameter that I'll be lucky if I get 4 cents. That's about firewood, you know. And you see there's a split right there. One of the things that's going to show on my better logs here is even though it's been sitting out here for a week, they didn't split, they didn't bust. That's one of the things that determines whether or not it's a good log or not. That one's a pretty good one. It's straight, and the color is light, but it still has that brown heart. And we'll have a couple up here where it's all white in the middle. You see that one's still got a brown, that one's got brown. So these are nice logs, and the way you can tell they're nice is he had me cut them at 16 foot. And but they're not premium. They're not the best. See that brown? See that one right there is getting better, but some of these are just pure white on the inside, and that's your best quality wood. So diameter, straightness, lack of knots, you know, and then also the color on the ash trees. And kind of another one is whether or not they are stable. Otherwise, did they split? And a lot of these didn't. You got weather checking. You know, they check up a little bit because it's been in the sun now for a few days, but none of them really busted open, and that means they're kind of higher quality wood on the inside. So, and the ones that he was nervous about splitting, if you notice, he put those guys in right there. So one of the things I don't know if you notice is I use that wedge a lot, and the reason is because the tractor's sitting right there and I don't have a lot of room to work. So my plan B always is to use the wedge to raise the log off the ground when I'm making that final cut. I'll put the camera in close and you can see that operation on this next one. But what happens is you put the wedge on top, pound it in a little bit, it'll pull that log a couple inches off the ground so you don't have to go cut into the dirt. Well, the saw's been idling a lot better, so I figure I should put the camera on again for a little bit. And with this log right here, that's a nice log right there. Both of them are, both parts of that tree. And while it's not white all the way through, you know, it doesn't have as much of the brown. But when you see a 16-footer or a 12-footer, you know, that means you got a good log, good tree. So let's keep going. Let me wedge this one. And then notice that the saw is idling and not stalling. And I believe I'll shut it off and restart it just to show that it has one full start capability now. All right, comment on wood quality. You see the split, the crack forming on that one? That's going to go all the way through, which is going to reduce the value of that log quite a bit, as compared to this one here, where it's still solid. There's really nothing happening to that log. You'll get a lot of wood out of that one. In terms of color, this one right over here, that one right there, that's what you're looking for with that. So I got through about 2/3 of the job and ran out of gas. But the saw has not failed, and I finally got the tune to where it'll idle. It restarts with one pull, so it's doing those very basic things right. That for me are really critical for a saw to do on a job. It cuts fast. It's fast as anything I need, and you know, it's got that little bit of rattle going on, but I don't think that seems to be a problem. I think it's just the way it is. And I'm going to check how much oil I used. I like to make sure that I'm using about as much oil, you know, in percentage of the tank. Otherwise, I want to use a tank of oil for a tank of gas. And getting through 20 logs on one tank, that's not bad. It's not excellent. It's not bad. My auto-tunes will get through the whole job on one tank, but this is a 95cc saw, so its fuel usage is not bad at all once I got the tune right at the top end. And it's beginning to break in. It's beginning to make more power. And I guess where I am on this is it took me a little while to get it started. I had to yank on it more than I like. To me, it's got to be around 4 pulls to be right. Now we'll see tomorrow, and when the saw breaks in, if I can get it to that. But that's like one of the first and most important parts of life with a saw, is getting it started so you don't get yourself aggravated or wore out before you even start your job. And the second thing is I was able to chase the tune for today with a screwdriver to the point where I can leave it in the log idling, pound in a wedge, put the wedge and axe in there, you know, pound in a wedge, set things aside, hit the throttle, and it's still going. It's going good. And not stall. It's really a pain if you have the saw in the wood and you're trying to put a wedge in or whatever you have to do and have it stalled, then you have to have it restarting at an awkward angle. So that's the second most important thing to me, is it just can't be stalling when I'm doing stuff like that. And the third is when I set it down and like refuel and you know, it's going to take a couple of pulls now because I let it run all the way out. I just wanted to see what it would do. Some saws you can't get to the bottom of the tank. I think this one I got to the bottom of the tank, which is kind of a side thing, but it's important. But all these little things, that's what adds up to life with a saw for me. Does it start easy? Does it restart easy? Does it idle? Does it cut fast enough for the job? And it started a little hard, but we'll see over the next week or so whether or not that begins to get better as it breaks in. I got it to idle, so that's important. I got it to restart on one pull where I shut it off and just tried it. It was a one pull restarter, so that's good. There's a few other things. Fuel usage. I think the fuel usage right now is okay. It's better than I expected. It's certainly better than the 288, and which I guess is a surprise because the 288 is a really solid saw. But remember, this saw here has got the quad port cylinders. At least the Husqvarna OEM does, and that's another generation ahead in terms of two-stroke design. Fuel usage was one of the things they gained with that new cylinder design. What else? It doesn't vibrate. Not bad at all. I would say that vibrates in the same order of magnitude as the OEM version, and it's really not that far off, like you know, the 372 with the light springs. It's certainly better than a 272, you know, so it's actually, the vibration on this is actually pretty good. The kind of things I would be tempted to do on this saw, I might put in OEM anti-vibe springs to see if that makes it vibrate even less. Although I don't see the vibration as a big problem. That's more of a curiosity for me than anything else. We're going to see about the oil pump. I think I ran out of oil. The chain stretched quite a bit. It's not the saw, that's the chain. But I ran this to the very end intentionally. The other thing I might be curious about is just pulling that top end, measuring the tolerances between the piston and the cylinder. And guys, I probably won't have to do this, and most of you would not even want to bother, but when the saw runs that good, if I can make it run that good for a longer period of time, now it's worth investing in like a better piston, like an OEM piston, or possibly a better top end. And for the price point of this saw, for the capability this saw has, the idea of investing in this saw in order to turn it into a really solid work saw really begins to make sense. Of all the Farmer Tech saws that I've worked with, the 660s were the first ones where I kind of got over the edge to saying it's worth investing in this saw because the performance warranted that. The 288 is not a bad work saw for a firewood guy right now, but this saw right here, this saw is worth investing in. It's worth putting in a new top in if you had to make it right. This is a really, really good running saw. And life with a saw type characteristics that this saw displays is telling me that it's worth it if I had to put in money to make it better than what it is. And like I said, the 660s are the only other ones I could actually say that about. Right now, I'd say that's a pretty good landing saw. And if it holds up, remember, this is speculation because I don't have time. If I'm here this time next year like I was with the 660s after a year, or I'm going to be with a 288 and still saying, hey, you know, this is a decent saw, then I'll have enough time on it to really give you an opinion whether or not it's a legitimate work saw. But the running characteristics, the life of the saw characteristics right now are telling me that this is worth investing in. And if it holds up, I'd say this is actually a legitimate saw for a person to use on a tree crew or tree service, or, you know, a landing saw or something like that. But I got to tell you, I'm pretty impressed. I really am impressed with the performance of this saw this morning, and it's just getting better. Yep, both tanks are bone dry.